Hello, and welcome back to the Be More Connected Summit. And I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected. And today we are here with Nicole Steward, social worker and radical self-care advocate. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Elise. It's so good to see you.
So great to see you. And thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to start off by just asking how you're holding up. Where are you situated in the world right now? And how has this time been for you?
Thank you for the check-in. I'm in San Jose, California, which is the Bay Area for those of you who are not in California. And I am very, very busy. I am a school social worker. I currently happen to be the only social worker in my school district. So as the things have shifted toward, we're going to be off for 2 weeks. We're going to have an extended spring break. We'll be back in May to no more school year.
Right.
It's kind of been really, my role has shifted quite a bit it's shifted quite a bit in that I'm doing a lot more social emotional support for students and a little less resource connecting, only because right now everything's kind of at a pause.
Sure.
Knowing that the resource connection will come back once we're kind of allowed to move about the cabin again. So it's really about checking in with our kids who are disengaged from the distance learning, and kind of calming fears, making sure families know that they won't be evicted right now, making sure that they have the food that they need or access to groceries and just the support. So very busy, which actually is helping me stay connected and active through what is kind of a collective trauma right now.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you're doing, especially during this time. We need leaders who are operating with that sense of love and compassion and being able to attend to the anxiety and the fear and the trauma that's coming up in this moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And I love to start off by asking our guests to share a bit about their own journey of healing and what's led them to where they are today.
Absolutely. So actually, this is a perfect timing for this kind of a share for me, as April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And my journey started as a survivor. Moving into social work, I moved into social work pretty early in college, right after graduating high school, and found my way into the rape crisis world. And at that time, I wasn't fully aware that I had been shifting in that direction as a way of healing my own past. It wasn't something I was paying attention to. I hadn't studied trauma. I was just kind of doing the work. And I experienced a burnout probably my first 3 years as a social worker. And that burnout I didn't really learn a lot from. It felt really like, I just have to do more and harder and faster of the kind of trivial self-care stuff that I was doing at the time. And for me, what that was retail therapy. So, when I wasn't feeling good or things were being triggered, I would go and buy things. And then I found myself in credit card debt from that. I would, especially for me, home visits were very nerve-wracking when I started doing my work. And as a way of treating myself or taking care of myself, I would, after each home visit, go and get a large McDonald's fry and a chocolate shake. That worked for a little while when I was doing a weekly home visits, but then doing daily home visits and still treating myself didn't quite work. So with that self-care, I found myself gaining weight and being unhealthy and having some health complications from that.
Sure.
Also, I worked at an agency where happy hour was a release. And that was fine when we were doing happy hour on Fridays. But then when we were eventually shifting to happy hours on, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I noticed some of my colleagues becoming addicted in that way. So I kind of, after my first burnout, I pulled into self-care harder, and it wasn't the right kind of self-care. And that worked for a little while until I found myself in my second burnout. And that was kind of my wake-up call of, what I'm doing for self-care isn't working. What I think feels good in the moment, because it does actually relieve my stress in the moment, but the long-term impacts were not sustainable for me. So
100%.
I had to find a more sustainable way of taking care of myself if I wanted to continue to be a social worker and be in that world. So for me, it was really trying to figure out where the disruption or the dysregulation was coming from. And that's when I found yoga. I initially found yoga at a gym, and I purely went for the yoga booty. No qualms with that. That's exactly, there was nothing beyond, like, I didn't want to be meditative. I didn't want to, find any inner peace. It was just, I want that booty.
Yeah.
And lucky for me, the instructor who was at the gym had her own yoga studio, and I ended up shifting kind of to follow her at her studio. And that's when I really started to fully pull into everything about yoga and what it is and kind of how it would help me. I didn't become a yoga teacher until almost 10 years after that, partly because of cost and location and access, which is why I'm so passionate about access right now. Because I know, as being in Ohio or being in kind of the middle of Connecticut, there weren't a lot of options. I would have to go to New York or come out to San Francisco. And I was lucky enough in 2007 to find myself, my husband and I moved to California, and I found myself in the Bay Area and realized, I started yoga with a VHS tape of Rodney Yee, AM, PM yoga.
Nice.
And I was in the Bay Area where he had a studio. Like, I realized, oh my gosh, I could drive 45 minutes to San Francisco and take a class with Rodney Yee.
Wow.
So I kind of was like, in heaven here for a little while. And
Love
this
it.
is when I was so thrilled. And I still hadn't fully understood the power of yoga or meditation or mindfulness at that time, but I knew it worked for me.
Yeah.
And what it did ultimately was allow me to have some stillness in my body and in my brain, to focus my work when I was at work on the needs of those I served, and then to be able to kind of nourish myself and work myself through some of the dysregulation that I was feeling. If I had to leave someone at a hospital or in a juvenile hall or somewhere where I couldn't take them home with me or take care of them, and they were still on my heart, I could bring that to my mat and kind of work that out. And I just became more aware of the ways that my work as a social worker was impacting me, the vicarious trauma that I was picking up and digesting. And specifically I'd say in the last 5 to 6 years, I've been understanding a lot more about the ways that my own past traumas were being triggered by the vicarious trauma that I was experiencing. Right. And that's when I had the aha of like, oh, I became a rape crisis counselor because I needed to heal my own past as a survivor. And that began to make sense why it was such an intense work for me, and why I was so passionate, and why I would put in the long hours and volunteer for every extra assignment, right? I was doing the overwork as a way of healing myself, but I wasn't fully aware of that yet.
Sure.
And it was once I finally became a yoga instructor, and kind of people sort of know me as nerding out a lot on this stuff. I'm very skeptical about some of the woo-woo things, even though I know they work for me. For me, it's why do they work? So that's kind of where I've ended up, is pulling into really understanding trauma, how it impacts the brain and body, so that when I'm sharing yoga and mindfulness and meditation with others, I see the side eye roll, because that's what I did, right? I'm like, oh, don't tell me to meditate. And I know it works. So I have a little bit of a different perspective of, I've been trying it for the last 20 years. And I know what it can do. And also, here's a little bit more information. I'm so thrilled that there's more research on this stuff now.
100%. I also really appreciated how you were talking about taking some of these more spiritual practices and also pairing them with some of the more scientific neuroscience, and allowing that to be a tool and a mechanism to connect with a wider audience who may not be as comfortable or as familiar with yoga, with spirituality, with meditation. And I'd love if you could share a bit more about trauma-informed yoga and how that shows up in your work.
Ultimately, the goal of trauma-informed yoga is to get someone on the mat and into their body, really feeling whole, feeling part of themselves. Because what trauma does is it separates us from our body. It makes us feel disconnected, and it engages our sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight and flight response. And with yoga, when we're taking deep belly breaths and we're physically moving our body with the breath, we're engaging our parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest. system that allows us to kind of have, those moments of calm and ease in the body. And the goal of yoga in general is that what we practice on the mat, whether it's getting into a warrior pose and feeling that empowerment, coming into a child's pose and feeling that vulnerability, is that whatever we practice on the mat, we can embody in our daily lives. And I often think about that, especially if I'm in a meeting where I have to advocate for someone, for a family or a position or a resource, and I know I'm going to get opposition. In my head, I literally put myself in a warrior pose.
Yes.
And then in my whole body, I feel that level, that engagement of my whole body, standing tall and a firm warrior, so that I can kind of take what's coming and advocate for what I need. So that's kind of a very, very brief overview of trauma-informed yoga. And that's how I engage it with the work that I do and the folks that I serve.
Yes. And I love that you take that approach of really allowing the trauma-informed yoga to meet each and every individual where they are.
That agency, again, once you experience it on the mat where I'm going to make the decision that's best for my body in this moment, you carry that out into the world where you can really advocate for yourself and have that agency and show up whole.
Yes. And how empowering is that?
Absolutely.
And I also love how you speak about self-care as a radical tendency. And I would love if you could share a bit more information about your philosophy around that.
Yeah. And so for me, there's basic self-care and then there's radical self-care. And again, it was from my own journey, engaging in what I thought was self-care and knowing that it did help in the moment. When I had a really rough week, if I got to go shopping or go eat or drink or, do any of those kind of things, yes, it helped in the moment, but the long-term impact was more, and it was more numbing and dissociation, and less coming into myself. So for me, it was a realization after my second burnout, and I had 3 burnouts. So after my second burnout was really like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I do still want to, people were saying, well, maybe social work isn't your thing, or maybe you want to do something else. And I was like, no, this is the work I need to do. I need to work, fighting child abuse and ending sexual violence and, ending homelessness. This is my passion. And how do I do it in a way where I can do this long term?
Right.
And what I did actually initially was I looked back to when I first started as a rape crisis counselor. There were some, in social work, it's a pretty young population because of the burnout. Like people usually, you don't see 50-year-olds in social work because they've burnt out by then. That said, when I started doing rape crisis work, I noticed there were probably 3 or 4 older women, and I'm in my 40s now, so saying older, when I was in my 20s, 40 was old. So older women who stayed in the work for a long time. And what I noticed about these women was that they were all women of color, some Native American, some African American, some Latina. And every year we would have these national conferences on domestic violence or sexual assault. And, it's a whole 3 days of topics that are really heavy. And you're just sitting there hearing all this data and all these statistics and all this new information, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Heavy.
Exactly. And I was in a session and I noticed a few of those ladies that I just mentioned sitting in the back of the room, and they were knitting. And my 20-year-old self thought, oh my gosh, that is so rude. We are listening to the speaker who has prepared all this for us, and they want us to pay attention. And these ladies are sitting back here just knitting like nothing's going on. And, I was a little like, oh, what are they doing? And then I ended up asking one of them what they were knitting, because it was like a beautiful scarf or something. And I was like, well, I noticed you guys are doing this while the speaker's talking. Are you getting anything? Are you picking up any information? And the one woman said to me, she's like, this is the only way I can absorb the information without absorbing the trauma.
Wow.
And I didn't know what she meant at the time. But again, now that I've studied trauma and really understand how it shows up in our body and what we need to do to kind of unwind it, what I realized is they were doing radical self-care. They were actually engaging their parasympathetic nervous system by doing something with rhythm, right? Something that they didn't have to if I were to knit, I would have had to concentrate and figure it out. But for them, it was automatic. So they could knit and listen at the same time.
Wow.
And this kind of lends itself to fidget spinners. But that science is very real. When you're doing something with your hands, your brain, right, your prefrontal cortex is able to kind of come online a little bit more.
Sure.
and it quiets your amygdala, the fear center of the brain, so that you can actually focus. That's
Mm.
why they talk about doodling when you're listening to a lecture, right?
Sure. Yep.
So that was something that at the time, my, arrogant 20-year-old self was like, that's so rude. But in realizing what they were doing, that really made me question, okay, so if that's really self-care versus like going to McDonald's for, fries and a shake,
Mm.
what else is real self-care? And the word radical just means getting to the root or disrupting the status quo. And for me, that's kind of what it had to be, was self-care. Radical self-care is about finding those tendencies, those habits, those ways of being, those patterns that you can pull into your life that are sustainable and that really keep you not just surviving, but thriving.
Mm.
The self-care I was doing was helping me survive, but it wasn't really helping me thrive, because again, I found myself in credit card debt. I found myself gaining weight and having health problems. My second burnout, I thought I had lupus. I was losing my
Wow.
hair. I had rashes on my body. I was not eating. I was, so, and it wasn't until I actually shifted that work. I left Rape Crisis and came into education work.
Mhm.
Within 2 weeks, all those symptoms went away.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And
Wow.
my doctor was, I don't know what's going on with you. Let's do this test. It might be this, it might be that. So it took 2 weeks of really like decompressing from that work and shifting
Yeah.
for that to happen. So for me, the concept of radical self-care is really about, first, a reality check, right? Like, where are you really in your need for care? How heavy is the load that you're carrying? What kind of vicarious trauma are you absorbing?
Mm.
Because as social workers, we're very superhero minded. And
Sure.
the first time I heard about vicarious trauma, I thought that's ridiculous. There's no way I'm absorbing trauma because I'm listening to someone talk about trauma, because they
Yeah.
have it worse than me. And there's no way you can tell me that my nervous system is having the same experience.
Sure.
But it is.
But it's real. Yeah.
Absolutely, it is real. So, and recognizing, right, the mirror neurons, that I can be listening to someone's trauma and
Hmm.
my nervous system is being impacted in a similar way. So it's reality check of, where are you really?
Hmm.
The second one for me is remembering, both remembering why we do the work, our sacred why. For me, it was really trying to heal that wound that I experienced as a child,
Mm.
and recognizing that and honoring that, not discounting it, not saying, oh, I'm a survivor, that's done, that's old, I'm just going to focus on helping other people, but realizing I am doing some work for myself while I'm doing work for others, and that's okay, as
Yes.
long as you're aware of it. And also remembering, right?
Mm.
Kind of the opposite of dismembering, which is not the best word to think about, but truly like remembering our body and our soul, right? Our mind and our spirit, our work and our home life. Really kind of bringing those things together, and remembering that those, our head and our body are connected. And then reconnecting those things,
Mm.
really being very deliberate in saying, I am going to connect, my ethics to the way I show up for my work. Um, and then beyond that, it's really about regulating and rebalancing, finding those radical ways, not just eating or drinking alcohol, or not overeating or drinking alcohol, but how can I really nourish myself to rebalance my system? How can I pull into practices that will help me re-regulate, like meditation, mindful breathing, physically moving my body, whether it's qigong or yoga or running, and then really finding some routines, rituals, and rhythms.
Mm.
Rhythm is a big one. Getting, talk about being out of sync with things. And that's kind of how dysregulation feels, like you're just out of sync. Things aren't clicking, they're not fitting well, they're not settling. And that's just a really vague feeling that you can get. And that's kind of like the start of a burnout, right? When you're like, I don't know what's wrong, but it's just
Just
not
feels
right.
off. Yeah.
Yeah. So really, and it's usually a rhythm, right? Our heartbeat's a rhythm. Our breath is a rhythm. The way we do our day is a rhythm, right? Our work week and our weekend, those are very different rhythms. If you think about how you are in your work week, and then you think about the weekend, your whole body shifts,
Totally
right?
different. Yeah.
Monday to Saturday, different.
Yep.
And then also just thinking about the rhythms of your daily routine. for me, and this is part of the gift that I'm sharing with the folks who are participating in this Be More Connected Summit, is a worksheet to really think about what are our morning and evening routines. And I'll be honest, I'm constantly working on that. That's a big one for me. My evening routines I have down. I'm a night owl, and I really like having certain things in place to go down. My morning routines, still a work in progress.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I'm not a morning person, but I'm working on it because I got to get up and I want to set my day in the right way.
Beautiful.
So our
So
morning
important.
and our evening, absolutely, our routines, but also thinking about a ritual for starting work and a ritual for ending work.
Mm,
At first I put, initially like how you travel to work and from work, but since we're all kind of stuck at home, just really thinking about like, I know I'm working when I do this, like this is the start of my workday. And when I'm done working, this is how I know I'm done. And that's super important, especially now that we are working from home, for those of us
right.
who are, because things tend to bleed. I know the first week I was doing this, I was up till like 11 o'clock still working. And then I stopped myself like, why am I working this late?
Right, right,
But I
right.
couldn't get my rhythm for work. So, and then the last one is that weekend, finding that weekend rhythm. And the reason I put it on the weekend is just because I feel sometimes we have a little more space and time
Mm,
to really sit and think, okay, what do I need to get back into sync with? Especially for me, using Sundays as a way to re-gear toward the week. Sunday is a day of rest for most people. If you are religious, maybe you go to a church service or you have dinner with with your family, some way to get connected to folks, to really feel grounded in that moment, and then pivot toward your work week. So that's the offering I'm sharing with your folks. But once we've kind of thought about our rhythms, our routines, and our rituals, and really rituals are just routines with a lot more intention, right?
yes.
This is something I do every day, but I'm doing it very fully aware, paying attention and being mindful. And then after that, it's really about reclaiming the work that we love to do,
Mm,
knowing that we've built in this resilience. So for me, the radical self-care, again, is about getting to the root, really understanding why we do the work we do, how it shows up for us, and then how we can kind of settle it into our lives in a way that doesn't feel disjointed. Because if we're honest, we work and home and in our professional and our personal lives, it's good to have boundaries for them, but we are one human being. And to
mm,
have to compartmentalize or code switch or, become a different person each time, sometimes we need to keep those boundaries. And for me, I've been able to, I really talk a little bit about armoring up when we're going into places that we might need to be more vulnerable or we might absorb trauma. And for me, armoring up just means, I'm going to put on my jewelry. I'm going to wear my mala beads. I have a sweater that says social worker on it. And
nice.
then I'm in that mindset, right? Like I am on, and I'm feeling protected, even if it's just small little omens that I'm wearing that nobody else knows about. And then when I come home, part of my ritual is taking all of those off. I set everything down and everything has its place until I need it the next day.
Yes.
So really pulling into those ways that we can help sustain ourselves and feel that level of resilience that everybody talks about.
Yes. And I love how you spoke about that process of remembering
Mm,
and really creating space for reconnection of our mind and our body, of ourselves with our soul. And that is such a lifelong journey, I think,
yes,
and can be really tricky because our society is often set up in a way to keep us very disconnected in
absolutely.
in many ways.
Mm,
And I also loved what you were speaking about in terms of creating that kind of energetic support for yourself to step into the work that you're doing in the world and being able to feel really supported and really authentic. And I was listening to an episode of your podcast recently where you were speaking about this distinction between attachment and authenticity. And this really resonated for me as someone who sometimes has challenges with people pleasing and setting boundaries and showing up in the most authentic, aligned way. And
yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that tension and how we can work to show up more authentically and speak our truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the challenge between authenticity and attachment, right? We all need attachment. We need to be attached to others, for care, for love, for growth. you think about attachment in children, right? An infant needs a caregiver to survive, literally.
Yeah.
And a lot of attachment theory is about how organized or disorganized was that caregiver for you as a child. So did you have someone who was there every time you needed it, and anytime you had an issue or you had to cry out for something, that need was met? Awesome. For other people, maybe that need was met sometimes, but not other times, so a little disorganized. And then for other people, that those needs just weren't met. Their caregivers were unable to meet the needs, or they just didn't have a caregiver who cared, or who loved them, or who was able to do that. And that's a very dysregulated attachment. And just in general, thinking about, Gabor Mate is the researcher and the professional that I quote with that, but he talks about how even infants recognize that attachment is so vital to survival that if they know that they can't be authentically who they are in order to get their needs met by that attached caregiver, they will shift that authenticity, and attachment becomes more important. So they, and kids will recognize, like, oh, I have to be quiet in order for my parent to care for me, or I have to be more loud and ask directly for it for my parent to caregive for me. That's kind of for us where the perfectionism comes in, right?
Right.
And it may not be direct messages, but some of us get that message of, you need to do everything right in order to be cared for. And again, it's not always our caregiver saying, like, if you're not perfect, I'm not going to love you. But it may just be messages that we get from watching adults talk or seeing different relationships. And we just see this in general, right? Like, when you think about social media, when you talk to folks who, when they're on social media, they have to wear a lot of makeup, or they have to be a persona, and you say, like, well, can't you just be who you are? Their fear is, oh, I could be who I am, but then people won't love me, right? I won't have that attachment. I won't have the followers or the likes. So I'm trading my authenticity for attachment. And it's something that I think we all really need to think about in our personal lives, but also our professional lives. As a social worker, social workers are used to banging against the system.
Yeah.
and usually being pushed back against. And can we continue to do that and be authentically ourselves and advocate for those that we serve? Or, we talk about, jokingly talking about selling out. Or am I going to pull back on who I am authentically, and so that I don't make any waves, I don't disturb anybody, I'm just going to sit at my desk and do my job? The challenge when you do that, and yes, you might get more accolades, your boss might appreciate that more, but if you're not showing up authentically, there's eventually that dismembering, right?
Right. 100%.
Where you're there in your body and you think you know who you are, but how you're representing yourself to other people is very different. And the challenge with that is that you get very dysregulated and dismembered input from other people, right? Some people might love that. We talk a little bit about code switching, and as folks of color, sometimes I've had this experience. When I go to work, I have to be different than when I'm at home with my family. I know I had one job where I felt the need, I'm naturally curly hair, obviously. I felt the need to straighten my hair and wear suits. That's not me. I'm a curly girl. I like my sweats, and I can be professional, but like that, when I was doing that work, that I definitely burned out at one of those jobs, because I had to be someone different during the day than I could be in the evening. And being that someone different meant that people interacted with me differently. So there was a whole world of difference when I was at work versus when I was at home.
Huge. Yeah.
And that was when I made a decision, like, I'm not doing that anymore. If someone wants me and my work, then they're going to get all of me, and, take it or leave it. And I've been lucky enough that, that's been taken and accepted. And I'm still trying to find that authenticity, because there are messages that we get, again, maybe not directly, but I remember this. I'm at my current job for almost 5 years. And the first year, I think I started there with my curly hair, not a problem. And then I remember, like, a few months in, I just decided to straighten my hair, because I was like, oh, I'll try something different. And I went to a meeting, and this woman who was a supervisor of mine, who was an older Latina woman, she like rushed over to me as soon as she saw me, and she kind of pulled me aside, and she was actually asking, she's like, did anybody tell you had to straighten your hair? Like, what happened to your curls? Are you okay? Like,
oh, wow.
She was actually kind of concerned. She thought maybe someone had spoken to me or said something that made me want to straighten my hair.
Right.
and it was interesting because she had straight hair and I didn't realize she was actually naturally curly because
Mm,
she had been straightening her hair her whole career, and she was in her 50s at that time.
wow.
And she even said, she's like, I have been straightening my hair for so long, and your curls are so beautiful, and that's what I've been seeing. And now that I saw your hair straight, it did something to me.
Right.
And actually since then, that manager has been wearing her hair curly lately every now and then, which is really beautiful to see her remembering, right, her authenticity.
Remembering. Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we pull apart and get dismembered. And it happens pretty young.
Mhm.
And again, through school, you get messages of like, oh, we like you like this, but not like that. We'll take you when you look like this, or when you sound like this, but not when you look or sound like that. And it can be a challenge to show up authentically and remember those parts and demand that other people see that fully.
Mm.
But the more we do that, the more we give other people permission to do that and to interact with us in that authentic way.
Yes. And I think that it's so incredibly powerful how almost immediate that shift can be in the way that
Oh,
you were talking about that interaction that you had with your coworker. I know that there's been experiences in my life as well where just from one interaction with someone, it opens up so much potential and so much opportunity and expansion for really stepping into our authentic selves. And
absolutely.
we can only do this together. Like we need each other to be reflecting back and being the mirrors for each other of what's possible.
Yes. And that's the connection, right? When we really are connecting with each other, it helps us connect back to ourselves in a beautiful way.
Yes. And I'd love to talk a little bit about this moment that we're in. And
Mm.
it does feel like such a potent shift and change. And I'm wondering, in the work that you're doing in the world, how that is affecting you, how that's affecting the clients that you serve, and what you hope this time could inspire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have been thinking a lot about this. I've been riding all the waves of emotion like everybody else, letting that fear come in and really listening to it. For
Yeah.
me, again, I've had this dance with fear where I read The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker a long time ago,
Mm,
recognizing like being fearless is the aim, but hopefully we never actually get there because fear is a good teacher. And I've
mhm.
really been trying to listen when that fear gets incited in me, whether it's because I heard something on the news or, from
Yeah.
someone, really trying to check that and say, okay, what are you trying to tell me? Like, is there something I actually need to do right now to make myself safer?
Mm,
Or is there something else that I need to address that isn't necessarily what I'm afraid of right now?
right.
So really, I've been riding those waves, but I've really quickly shifted toward hopefulness, and I'm looking forward to what I see right now is this is kind of a universal pause. I've already kind of been saying to folks that like the earth is trying to shake us off. She is done with our nonsense. Like, and I'm talking about like when we had flooding, we've had earthquakes, we've had hurricanes,
Massive fires.
exactly. Just before this, Australia was on fire. I think we've
Yeah.
forgotten that, right? We have a little bit of trauma amnesia.
Right.
Because it's been so overwhelming. But I live in California. We in the last few years had Paradise is a place up north that
Mm,
burned completely the whole town.
wow.
So they were kind of experiencing a mini version of this where everybody had to leave and move and find a new place to be. And I really got to pull into some of the with some of the teachers who survived that, and how overwhelmed and traumatized they were by that really opened my eyes to the beauty of this moment. And I put that in very cautiously with an asterisk because I know silver lining things is not always the way we want to go. But for me, I am looking at a few silver linings. One is that this is universal and global. So sometimes when we have a natural disaster and people need help, we forget the people who need help because it isn't happening to us. We've heard it on the news. Oh my gosh, that's so horrible. And then we go about our daily life and we forget that those people still need help years later.
Right.
Paradise is still rebuilding. I still don't think they have schools yet. They were doing schools in storefronts, but a lot of families had to leave the area because they couldn't afford to rebuild. So 3 or 5 years out, those communities still need help, but we are able to forget about them because it's not impacting us.
Mm,
the beauty of this global pandemic is that it's impacting everybody. So we can't say, oh, well, those people will take care of themselves. We
Right.
have to do this together, and we have to do it nationally, globally, right, as a full Earth community. So for me, knowing the work that I do, oftentimes it's very easy for people to say, well, that person needs help because they did something wrong, or they didn't do this right,
Mm.
right? Or there's something just about them. We can't say that right now, right?
At all.
And I know when people started to say this is a great equalizer, I think that's maybe what they meant, even though that wouldn't be the word that I would use.
Sure, sure, sure.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because we know there are inequities. However, we can no longer say that if someone is losing their job or their home, it's because they just didn't work hard enough, you know?
Right.
So in that way, I'm hopeful that the help that comes from all of this will be distributed somewhat evenly. And again, we're going to need some social workers to make sure it's proportionate
Right.
and there aren't disparities, but that's one of my things that I'm looking forward to. And I already know in my county, they have put out more housing. Magically, we've got funding for housing now, where we've always had a homeless problem, but now we have the urgency to do something about it.
Right. And
Which
that's
is
something
beautiful.
that I think it's like infuriating
Yes,
and inspiring at the same time. But you're like,
exactly.
listen, we have been having this problem, all of these problems for generations and generations and generations,
Yeah,
and there weren't resources there. But now, poof, we need them. Here they are.
exactly.
Like,
Magic. We have trillions of dollars all of a sudden that we need, right?
right,
So I don't ever want to hear any politician tell me there's no funding for something.
right.
That's my
Listen,
silver lining.
yeah,
But honestly, truly, again, what I'm hoping is that we can have a radical shift, because what's also being exposed right now is the systems that were not working, that some of us were saying, hey, this isn't working. And we were being told, no, it works for most people, so just sit down. Now that it's not working for a majority of people,
yeah,
those systems are being exposed. And I think this is an opportunity for us to change how those systems work. So the healthcare system, right? The disparities in the healthcare system are being exposed. Again, because this is an equalizer, because anybody can get this regardless of, who they are, where they come from, how much money they make.
mm-hmm.
The fact that the healthcare disparity still exists is being called out.
Yeah,
And my hope is that will shift. I'm a realist, so I try to be an optimist in there, but I also know that there are people who are freaked out by the fact that might change and want us to go back to the way it was immediately and lock
yeah,
stuff back down.
for sure.
My hope is that enough of us have been awakened to this, that we're not going to let that happen. We need that radical shift in that systems change. Education is changing and shifting a little bit. My hope is when we go back, we're done doing distance learning, we're back in the classroom, that we have a more elevated sense of that connectedness, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's less hierarchy between administrators, teachers, our classified employees like our janitors and our lunch ladies, and our students, because we have
Right.
all had to come to the table and show up for each other in this crisis. My hope is that we remember that when we come back, and that we also remember the social emotional needs of our students is priority. Because again, that's ultimately what most of my teachers are doing, is checking in on their kids. The work is getting done somewhat, but it's a lot of, how are you today? How are you doing? What do you need?
That
And
becomes the
we
top
have to
priority.
configure that. Exactly. And we have to continue that moving forward as well, as my hope.
Yeah.
I'm also hopeful that schools will recognize that they need more social workers.
Yes.
Please. But I won't hold my breath for that one. But after this is done, once we're able to kind of be back in our somewhat normal routines, there will be a lot of need and a lot of pain, and the depth of this is going to be felt. So, I'm hopeful that they'll know they need more social workers, and will employ them. Again, I know we have the money to do it.
Right.
And
Resources
then
exist.
exactly, they do. And I think even capitalism, I think, is being challenged right now,
In a
right?
big
You can
way.
absolutely. Again, because people are losing work through no fault of their own, right? And oftentimes when there's been a recession in the past, the corporations can say, oh, you individuals, you should have been saving money. You should have planned for this disaster. It's shame on you that you didn't have $10,000 in savings to take care of this. So right now, all these corporations are having to fold because of this crisis. But we're not saying, oh, corporation, you should have been planning for this. You should have had a rainy day fund. Why didn't you save for this? No, we're rushing to bail them out because we feel like they are essential. And what we're realizing is who is actually essential,
Right.
and who is not. And I'll tell you, it's the wage workers who are essential. And if we're saying that they're essential in a crisis, I don't want to hear any complaints about the fact that they need a living wage and they need health care and they need time off, right? So my hope is, again, this is shaking things up and exposing a lot of systems that aren't working. My hope and my genuine, I want to go beyond hope, but I truly, truly hope that folks are waking up to this. And when it's time to be told, all right, everybody get back to work, and I want you to work an 80-hour workday, and don't you dare complain about it because you're lucky to have a job. No, that we push back on that. The burnout culture, the hustle, the busy, the fact that we can't, spend time with our families and do our jobs and make a living. That's nonsense now. We know that's not true. Knowing full well that there are people really hurting, and that people that need our support. So those of us who are regulated, who feel resilient because we've been maybe doing some radical self-care, it's really incumbent upon us to be the ones to push forward, because things, like I said, they're going to want to slam them right back. Nope, we don't have funding for that. We're going to take those programs away. You can be evicted again, but all those. And it's those of us who are still paying attention and still able to do that work that need to push back and say, nope, we're not going back. We've got to move forward, this pivot and, shift. And for me, it's a shifting away from a work ethic where it was, burn yourself out, go, go, go. If you really care about this work, you'll do it till you die, versus a love ethic. And Bell Hooks talks about this love ethic where we really incorporate every aspect of our lives into our routines, our daily habits, that we're thinking about all of those things when we're doing our work. And again, for me, that love ethic is about remembering why we do this work and who we do it for.
Right.
Because it isn't just for us, right? It is for all of us to be more connected, for us to all feel that love and that attachment, and for us to all be able to be our authentic selves, because that makes all of us better, stronger. And that's just the way we have to move forward. That's my hope.
Yes. And that's so beautiful. I think really emphasizing rooting into that love ethic is the spirit and the energy that we need as we're looking forward.
Absolutely.
And I love to ask all of our guests what being more connected means to you.
I really love this be more connected concept, but for me, it really is about pulling into the ways of being where we can be with each other. None of us are independent or solo. We can be independent, but we're still interdependent on other folks. And again, we're realizing that now. I'm fairly independent, but I need that grocery store worker to be doing their job and stocking that shelf so I can get the things I need to be independent.
Yeah.
So we're really more interdependent than we think we are. And again, that's what this moment is exposing. And for me, it's, what's beautiful is, I have a dog, so I'm able to walk my dog twice a day. And when I get out, I get to see the neighbors, I already we had that kind of a neighborhood, but really seeing people, like making eye contact, saying it's so nice to see you, and you're outside, and yay. That feels so good. And what it does for us when we have that human connection is just so powerful. And I can feel that shift from being in the house all day to taking a walk and saying hi to my neighbors and just making those little connections.
Right.
But the beauty is we live in a global world, and we can all be connected in different ways, no matter where we are in the world. And that's the power of this kind of summit, which I love. I think this is amazing. The technology that we have access to, but
so
also,
powerful.
oh my gosh, it's beyond, right? And if this is the stuff that movies were made of in the 80s, where they said, in the future, we'll be talking into screens, right?
Right.
Or touching our phones, and you're like, that'll never happen. And here we are.
Yeah.
And it allows us to be together with each other, to help regulate and co-regulate each other. That's the beauty of being connected.
Yeah.
If you're calm and I come really upset or worried, but you stay calm, I'm eventually going to regulate to your calm. And that is so powerful. So again, just remembering the ways that we are interconnected and that we support each other and that we need each other to live our most authentic lives, I think is really powerful. And Elise, I love this concept, and thank you so much for putting this summit on and really bringing these voices out. I'm looking forward to seeing all the other interviews as well,
Yes.
but this is a beautiful concept, and right now more than ever, we need to stay more connected.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for all of the insights and all of the wisdom that you shared today. I know this is going to be so supportive for our audience. And I would love if you could share how everyone can stay connected with you.
Absolutely. So folks can find me on Instagram. That's usually where I'm the most active, and I'm at Love Ethic Yoga. There's an underscore between each. So it's love_ethic_yoga. I also have a website. It's radical-tendencies.com. And that's where my gift for your listeners is. It's at
Yes.
radical-tendencies.com/be more connected. And they can just enter their email and get the download of the free gift that I'm offering. I also have a podcast. It's available anywhere you get your podcasts. So iTunes, Spotify, Apple, any of those places. And it's the Steward Project Podcast is the name.
Yes. Well, thank you so, so much. I know that for myself, this was such a nourishing conversation and so appreciated digging into this conversation about radical self-care. How do we remember who we truly deeply are and how to be able to share that more authentically with the world? And so I'm just so, so grateful for you and all of the work that you're doing. And I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you, Elise. I appreciate your work in the world, sister. And thank you for this beautiful opportunity. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Let's stay connected. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.